Why your life feels empty despite infinite connections. Imagine this: you're surrounded by hundreds, maybe thousands of people online. You get likes, comments, DMs, pings, snaps, emojis, tags, mentions every day. You wake up to notifications, scroll through digital lives, react to stories, laugh at memes, maybe even cry at a few. And still, late at night, when the screen goes dark and your thoughts are the only thing left, something feels off. Something is missing. There's an emptiness that doesn't quite make sense. A dull ache right below the surface. And you wonder, why do I feel so alone when I'm never really alone? That's the paradox of our age. We've achieved a level of connection that would have seemed godlike just 50 years ago. Instant communication across continents. Real-time updates from millions of lives. The ability to reach out, share, respond, react anytime, anywhere. And yet, depression is rising. Anxiety is epidemic. Loneliness is now considered a public health crisis. So what's going on here? Why, in a world where we are more connected than ever, does life feel so strangely hollow? To understand this, we need to start by asking a brutal question: what kind of connection are we actually building? Because not all connection nourishes. Not all closeness is intimacy, and not all attention is love. We've confused the appearance of connection with the experience of it. We've traded depth for frequency. We've mistaken stimulation for meaning. And in the process, we've flooded our lives with noise while starving for signal. Think about the last conversation you had that really changed you. Not just small talk, not just exchanging facts. I mean a conversation that left you trembling a little, that revealed something real, that made you feel seen. How often does that happen? And now compare that to how often we scroll, swipe, tap, going through the motions of connection without ever truly arriving in it. We're surrounded by people, but isolated in performance. We curate ourselves to be liked, but never reveal enough to be loved.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
And this isn't just a generational problem. It's a philosophical one. The German philosopher Martin Buber once wrote about two kinds of relationships: I-it and I-thou. In an I-it relationship, you relate to others as objects, tools, functions, roles. In an I-thou relationship, you relate to others as beings, as sacred, mysterious, living centers of consciousness. One is transactional, the other is transformational. And if you're honest, how many of your daily interactions fall into the first category? How many people do you treat as means, not ends? How many treat you that way? Here's the uncomfortable truth: technology hasn't disconnected us. It's hyper-connected our surfaces while allowing our depths to atrophy. We've built social networks without social fabric. We've created infinite contact without communion. We've optimized for attention instead of understanding. And like a person starving in a room full of candy, we are full of sweetness but empty of sustenance. Let's go even deeper. Ask yourself, when you post something online, what are you really hoping for? Is it validation? Is it recognition? Is it to be admired, to be envied? Or is it to be known? And if it's to be known, why does it feel like the more we share, the less we're actually seen? Because sharing isn't the same as revealing. Broadcasting isn't the same as being understood. You can be visible to the entire world and still be invisible to yourself. This is where the ancient wisdom traditions saw something we've forgotten. The mystics, the sages, the philosophers, they all warned us. The more shallow our relationships become, the more we drift from meaning. Not just with others, but with ourselves. Because connection isn't just external, it's internal. Before you can truly connect with someone else, you have to be connected to your own inner life. But how do you do that in a world that rewards distraction? How do you hear your own thoughts when you're constantly reacting to everyone else's? We've built a culture of constant reaction and called it engagement. We've built a society of self-promotion and called it expression. But what we've lost is relation. The slow, vulnerable, uncomfortable process of knowing and being known. And this is why your life feels empty. Not because you're broken, not because you're unworthy, but because you're being fed connection that isn't real. You're drinking salt water and wondering why you're still thirsty. So now we have to ask, is it even possible to feel whole again in a world like this? Can we recover what's been lost? Can we build real connection in the age of infinite contact? That's where we're going next. The disconnected self, why you can't find meaning in a mirror made of faces. We live in a time where reflection has been outsourced. We no longer look inward to discover who we are, we look outward. We measure our worth by engagement metrics. We define our identity by how others respond to us. We post a photo and wait for the reaction, as if the number of likes can confirm our existence. We scroll through the curated lives of others, searching for some kind of orientation, some framework to understand our own. But here's the paradox: the more we turn to others to see ourselves, the less of ourselves we actually see. It's like standing in a hall of mirrors, each one slightly warped, each one reflecting a version of you shaped by someone else's expectations, someone else's judgments. You start to forget which reflection is real. You try to adjust, to pose, to please. And slowly, without even noticing it, you begin to disappear behind the performance. That's what happens when the self becomes a product. When your identity is something you manage rather than something you inhabit. When your value is measured not by presence, but by perception. This is why so many people feel empty despite being surrounded by faces, because those faces aren't windows into real relationships. They're mirrors reflecting back our need to be seen. But here's the haunting part: being seen isn't the same as being known. You can be seen by millions and still feel invisible. You can be praised endlessly and still be hollow. Because the self you're showing isn't the self that's true, it's the self that's safe, and the self that fits the algorithm. The self that won't be rejected, won't be mocked, won't be misunderstood. But in protecting ourselves from pain, we also block ourselves from connection. Because true connection requires risk. It requires letting someone see the parts of you that might not get a like. Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you told someone how you really felt, without editing it for clarity or impact or approval? When was the last time someone looked at you, not your profile, not your highlight reel, but you, and said, "I see you. I get it. You're not alone"? If that feels rare, you're not broken. You're just living in a culture that's trained you to fear that kind of intimacy. Because intimacy is unpredictable. It can't be filtered, monetized, or optimized. It requires presence, and presence is something we're losing. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard once said, "The greatest hazard of all, losing one's self, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all." That's what's happening to us. We're losing ourselves not dramatically, not in one catastrophic moment, but slowly, gradually, through the constant erosion of authenticity. Every time we choose the mask over the truth, the brand over the being, the performance over the vulnerability, we drift a little further from who we are. And then we wonder why we feel so empty. But here's the deeper tragedy. We try to fill that emptiness with more of the same thing that created it. More content, more attention, more surface-level interactions. It's like trying to quench your thirst with seawater. The more you consume, the worse it gets. Because what we're really craving isn't stimulation, it's meaning. And meaning doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being known, fully, flawed, unfiltered. And that kind of knowing can't happen in a mirror. It can only happen in a relationship, a real one, where the ego steps aside and the soul steps forward. So what's the way out? It begins with a radical shift in where we place our attention. We have to stop treating other people as audiences and start treating them as fellow travelers. We have to stop marketing ourselves and start revealing ourselves. That doesn't mean oversharing. It doesn't mean putting your pain on display for likes. It means choosing depth over breadth, choosing presence over polish. It means remembering that your worth isn't something that has to be proven. It's something that's inherent, something that grows in silence, in solitude, in stillness. And maybe that's the most countercultural act of all right now, to be still, to unplug, not out of bitterness or superiority, but out of a desire to hear your own voice again. To sit with the discomfort of not being seen and realize that you are still real, that there is a you beneath the performance, and that you is where connection starts. So here's the question: if you stopped performing, who would still be there? If you stopped curating, who would still care? And if you stopped looking at yourself through the eyes of others, what would you finally see? Rebuilding real connection, the slow, uncomfortable path to a life that feels whole again. We live in a culture of urgency. Everything must happen fast: replies, results, growth, healing, transformation. But real connection, the kind that nourishes and anchors us, does not move at the speed of Wi-Fi. It moves at the speed of trust, and trust takes time. Trust is not built through perfectly worded texts or well-edited videos. It is built through shared silence, awkward pauses, repeated presence, and the mutual willingness to remain, especially when things get uncomfortable. That's why rebuilding real connection in a world trained for speed feels so strange. Because you have to slow down. You have to resist the pull of instant gratification. You have to choose depth, even when it's inconvenient. And let me be honest with you, the beginning of that path feels lonely. When you stop performing, you lose the applause. When you stop curating your life for attention, the likes dwindle. When you start telling the truth, not just the beautiful parts, but the raw, messy, uncertain parts, some people will walk away. That's the price of authenticity. It filters your life. It strips away the connections that were never real to begin with. And that can hurt. But it's also the beginning of something else, something rare, something durable, something sacred. The kind of connection that cannot be faked. The kind of bond that doesn't disappear when you're no longer entertaining. The philosopher Simone Weil once wrote, "Attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity." But when was the last time you gave someone your full attention? No phone in hand. No mental to-do list, just presence. When was the last time someone gave you that? In a world engineered to hijack our focus, attention has become a revolutionary act. It's the first brick in rebuilding real connection. To look someone in the eye and say, "I'm here. You matter. I'm not going anywhere." That's not a line, it's a lifeline. But attention alone isn't enough. We also need courage, because real connection requires being seen, not the polished version of you, but the scared, uncertain, longing version. The one you hide. The one you think makes you unlovable. That's where intimacy lives, not in perfection, but in exposure. And that's terrifying, which is why most people never go there. They settle for connections that are safe but shallow, relationships that are functional but not transformative. But here's the truth we try to avoid: you cannot feel deeply connected without first feeling deeply vulnerable. And that vulnerability, it's not a weakness. It's the birthplace of empathy, trust, and love. It's the moment when someone sees your pain and doesn't flinch. It's the moment when you admit your fears and someone leans in instead of walking away. That's where meaning is born, not in being impressive, but in being real. So how do we begin? Start small. One conversation where you tell the truth instead of what you think they want to hear. One day where you log off, not out of escape, but out of intention. One evening spent listening, truly listening to someone without needing to fix them, entertain them, or compare your experience to theirs. These moments seem small, but they are seeds. And if you keep planting them, they grow roots. And those roots will hold you steady in a world that constantly tries to pull you away from yourself. Because here's what no one tells you: the path to real connection is not glamorous. It's not viral. It doesn't come with a dopamine hit or a viral hashtag. It's quiet. It's slow. It's often boring. But it's also where life starts to feel real again, where the emptiness begins to lift, where the ache for meaning finally finds a home. So I ask you now, not as a philosopher, not as a creator, but as a fellow human, what kind of connection are you really looking for? One that distracts you from your loneliness, or one that walks with you through it? The final disconnect, why you must lose the world to find yourself. There is a moment, quiet, unsettling, and often unexpected, when you realize that no amount of connection can save you from the loneliness inside. That even if you were surrounded by friends, adored by millions, constantly affirmed and endlessly contacted, you would still feel a gnawing sense of dislocation, but of something missing. That moment isn't a failure. It's an invitation. Because it's only when the world fails to fill you that you begin to understand the most important connection isn't external. It's internal, and to find it, you may have to disconnect from everything else. This truth is ancient, but we've forgotten it. Every spiritual tradition, every school of philosophy worth its salt has taught the same principle in different ways. To find yourself, you must lose yourself, not in the crowd, but from it. You must retreat. Not permanently, not in bitterness or fear, but long enough to hear your own voice again. Because the world is loud. It will shout definitions at you of success, of love, of happiness, of identity, until you start to believe them, even when they don't fit. And if you never step away, you'll never know which thoughts are yours and which were planted there by everyone else. The philosopher Epictetus said, "Freedom is the only worthy goal in life." But freedom isn't just political or financial. It's psychological. It's spiritual. It's the freedom to think your own thoughts, to feel your own feelings, to live by your own values. And that kind of freedom only comes when you're willing to disappoint the world in order to be true to yourself. That's the great disconnect, not from people, but from the false self the world trained you to perform. So what does that look like in practice? It might mean solitude not as an escape, but as a return. It might mean silence not as absence, but as presence. It might mean saying no to the parties, the trends, the expectations so you can say yes to something deeper. It might mean losing relationships that were based on who you were pretending to be in order to make room for relationships that are built on who you really are. And yes, that will hurt. But it's the kind of pain that heals. The kind that clears space for something real. Because here's the paradox. We spend so much of our lives trying to be seen by others when what we truly long for is to be seen by ourselves. To look in the mirror, not the digital mirror of social media, but the soul's mirror, and recognize what we've become. To ask, is this me? Do I even like this version of myself? And if not, who am I beneath it all? You won't find the answer instantly. It won't come in a flash of insight or a perfectly worded quote. It will come slowly in quiet moments, in the stillness of a morning without your phone, in the discomfort of not having something to post or prove, in the honesty of a journal entry that no one will read, in the long, patient work of unlearning who you were told to be and remembering who you have always been. And once you touch that space, once you reconnect with your own essence, you'll discover something profound. You were never truly disconnected. You were just distracted. The emptiness you felt wasn't a flaw in your life, it was a message from your deeper self calling you home. And in answering that call, you will begin to build a life not based on appearances, but on alignment. Not on constant interaction, but on meaningful presence. Not on being liked, but on being whole. So here's the final question. If you lost the world's approval, but gained yourself, would it be enough? Because that's the moment your life begins to feel full again. Not because the world changed, but because you did.